So, this is the first episode, I suppose you call it, of my new channel called Fran Cooks Lunch. And kind of strangely, today I'm not going to be cooking lunch because I've already cooked lunch. But I do need to tidy up the kitchen, so maybe we'll get on with that. And in the meantime, I'll just say some things which may or may not be interesting to people. We'll see. I think depending on how many people like this, then it will either carry on or it won't. Anyway, so yeah, I've been meaning to sort of put my thoughts down in some kind of coherent way. Thanks to the beefing. For a while now. I mean, you sort of start getting older. And you have opinions and you talk to people, and those opinions mature and change and stuff like that. And it's just, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about what my philosophy on life is and things like that. It's kind of interesting talking about philosophies on life because it's one of the things that I don't think many people have. People might talk, or they like to talk about themselves as if they've got some kind of definition of who they are, and I do this job and these are my principles and all this. And a philosophy on life goes much deeper. It's like the whole reason that it's called principles is because it's at the beginning. In Spanish you say principio, which means at the very start. And that's what a principle is. It's like the foundation for everything to be built on. And it's kind of strange, but we don't really take the time to think about our lives almost at all. We're born into something. So just by definition, no matter what you've been born into, you just completely normalise that. Of course you do, because how else could you survive? But then we get into the sort of mindset, or it's not that we get into it, but we just have the mindset of this is how things are. So things are have always been like this, but that's just because before you're born you didn't have any idea about what anything was like anyway. And so of course they've always been like that for you, but they might have only been like that for 10 minutes before you were born. There's no way of actually figuring these things out. So I think that's normal. You just go through your life and you follow the normal path of, in my case it was going to school, then I went to university, then I did PhD, then I got a job, nothing to do with PhD, and then you just settle into your work life and you trundle away. And then, a bunch of things happen, which I may or may not go into at some future point. But you get married and you have kids. And then when you've had kids or when kids are on the cards, and at least for me, it was you start to see the world as it's not quite so set in stone, perhaps, as you thought it was. You actually can change things, and things things do change. We actually see almost a paradigm shift happen before our eyes, a few years ago with the whole COVID thing. And for younger generations, like my kids who were living through it, that was just completely normal. It's like the world completely flipped, but they were too young to remember the time before, so that's just normal. But I think where I'm going with this is the idea of a personal philosophy. It's what does that mean? Well, it's kind of how do you live your life, and what are you what's your life anchored to? I don't mean dogmatically or anything. It's just kind of what's real. What do you think? What have you been able to establish as real? And and what's just consensus? Because I think one of the things that I realised is there's a big difference between consensus reality, as we might be called, and truth. or the truth as far as we can establish it. And so, I mean, I had, when was it? I think it was when my wife was pregnant with my eldest daughter, so just like 14 years ago. And I sort of went through, process of thinking, oh, where's, what does all this mean? Why are we here and all that? And some guy that I worked with while I was contracting with, he sent me a video link and was like, you've got to see this, got to see this. And I was like, yeah, well, I'll watch anything. So it turned out it was the film The Zeitgeist. I don't know if any of you lot have ever seen it and stuff, and it's, I'm not saying that well, at the time, so you watch the Zeitgeist film and it tells you certain things about, like the way money's made in the Federal Reserve, and it talks a bit about astrotheology and things like that. And it was just like, wow, this is crazy. And I was surprised that when I spoke to people about it, and I said, you know what, there's this film, and it says this about whatever. And people would just completely dismiss it, like, nah, that's rubbish. How could that be? That's silly. How could it possibly be? Like, oh, so I'm not going to talk about the Federal Reserve and, just basically fiat banking in general. But even though it completely exists and it's completely true, and money literally is printed out of nothing, when you explain that to someone or just tell them, you go, nah, that's rubbish. How could that possibly be? Because really, if everyone did know about it or thought about it, I think Henry Ford said this, that if people knew how money worked, then there'd be a revolution at dawn. It's not exactly what he said, but that's kind of paraphrasing. So, just because something is true doesn't actually make it real either. I mean, it's obviously real, but it's not real in the way that it affects society, and that you can see things where, you'd think, well, if everyone knew this, surely it'd change, and, maybe it wouldn't, maybe people don't care, I don't know. But during this time of me, seeing things and, looking into things, and I read a book by Larkin Rose called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And I found it a bit of a slog, not because it's a particularly thick book or anything, but it was quite, like, it radically changed the way I thought about pretty much everything. And it's not that it's some radical new theory or anything, or, like you have to really study it to get to the essence of the truth. It was because it was quite the opposite. And it just kind of, I don't know what's the, kick the legs out from under me or something. That's whatever the phrase is. And the point is, it's like, the most dangerous superstition is that there's such a thing as authority. And obviously, I don't mean that there's no such thing as authority, because I mean, the practical level of authority where, like, police come and do things and, all that exists. So authority does exist, but there's no legitimate authority, because we are just all people. And so, you can't delegate. The whole point of it is that you can't delegate a right that you don't have. So, you can't really, although it all sounds nice in the social contract and you all get together and we all come to some kind of agreement, supposedly this happened at some point in history, which no one ever knows when. And, we all get together, agree that we all need to be governed and that we all need to pay taxes, and, we all going to look after each other and stuff like that. But at some point it all got mixed up. So, people believe that, when people put certain clothes on and do things that you're not allowed to do, that somehow is legitimate. And, if this is the first time that you're hearing it, you'll probably just say, oh, what are you talking about, Fran? Don't be silly, of course. What are you talking about? Police, we need police. Who build the roads if there was no government and stuff like that? But it's, if you really go to the quiet place in your mind and just let it sink in of, you know, we all are just people, and nobody magically has power over someone else. Like they just don't. There's a word for having humans who like own other humans. There's a word for that, and we don't allow slavery in our society. And slavery did exist. Slavery's always existed. Up until it got abolished. I mean, it still exists now. Apparently there's like more people actually, enslaved at the moment than there has been for like God knows how long. But back to the point. So the my philosophy on life it got changed at the point of me reading this book. In fact, I don't think I had a philosophy on life. I just kind of, I think that if you're just going along with everyone else, you don't have a philosophy on life. But because you can't, there's nothing pushing about. There's nothing to define it. There's no like boundary conditions to your thought. If you're just sitting there and muddling through, and like, just yeah, I'll watch this thing on telly and I'll do that, and it's time to do whatever, and you can't build a personal philosophy until you actually have some pushback, because that's how you find out what you really think. And so, I'd start to have like conversations with, you ever thought that perhaps it's not, the state isn't legitimate? And so people hear that in a certain way. So when you say criticize the state, the first thing that they'll do is they'll defend the political party that they're sort of aligned with. So if they like, the ones who are in power, then you say, you criticize the state, and they instantly assume that you're criticizing that political party. And obviously, if it's, the other political parties in power or whatever, then they're like, yeah, well, you're right, what we should do is this needs to change. And it's like, no, but that's just more state. The states always win. The state always wins the elections. And so, it's not just about the legitimacy of the state. So if we're all self-owned individuals, then that implies that the ultimate responsibility for your own well-being lies on you. That's it. So people will hear this and like they'll instantly say, so what you're saying is there shouldn't be any social safety net, and you're just one of these crazy right-wingers or whatever. And it's like, no. If anything, it's like, by what I'm saying, I suppose I'm an anarchist, or voluntarist, sort of like. I like saying anarchist, but like it's a voluntarist, really. I think that all interactions between people should be voluntary, and I really do believe that if you don't want to pay tax, then you shouldn't be paying tax. But at the same time, if you're not going to pay tax, then you shouldn't have any of the benefits of taxpayers. So it's like, where am I going with this? If we are independent, sovereign, people, then there's a responsibility, like a moral responsibility, that you should look after yourself, and you should take responsibility for yourself. So that's not, assuming responsibility doesn't mean that I'm saying, oh no, it's all my fault, I lost my job, that was my fault, or it's like, I've got a bad back, that's my fault, I've obviously done something. It's not that. It's not some kind of like perverse, inverse law of attraction where I did everything, and it's all me, what was me. But there's lots of things that we should do and a lot of people don't do to make their own lives better and look after themselves for the future and things like that. And like a really big part of this is health. And it's kind of crazy how people literally think about the health as if it's just some kind of lottery. It's just like, oh well, fingers crossed I won't get cancer. fingers crossed I don't get cancer. I really don't want to get cancer. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that I'm like trying to do to make sure, or at least reduce the chances of me getting cancer. So being healthy is, a big part of this. I don't know, have I just taken these out? I'm not taking these out. So, being healthy is a big part of this. And not being fat. I mean, really, not being overweight is a big deal. It's like the largest factor, of, risk of getting cancer is, are you obese? And like obesity, I mean, when I was a kid, okay, so I'm like 48 now. So when I was little, I remember interacting with my grandparents, my nan's, like brothers and sisters, and like they'd be my uncles, and they come to like her house, like if she'd be looking after me when my mum and dad were at work or whatever, and they'd come and they'd all be fat, and I remember like they could being that old, they must have been like in the late 50s, 60s and stuff, and like they were all fat and they didn't have teeth, and like they all had bloodshot faces and stuff from all the whiskey that they drank and stuff like that. And they all died young. All of them died of heart attacks. I mean, my nan died of a heart attack when she was in her 80s, but I think it was about the third one that killed her. But I thought for a while that she had a weak heart, but she obviously didn't, because she was drinking and smoking until the day she died, and it succumbed to the inevitable. But anyway, what I was talking about is, what you eat is really important. And it sort of like goes in with the whole, if you've got any kind of principles, and any sort of inkling towards, self-ownership, it's just crazy that you wouldn't look after yourself. And it's also more crazy that you'd somehow delegate this to the state. You just see it all the time. People just are literally delegating the whole, health part of the life to the state. And it's just like, there's never any, people used to, and I know it used to be sort of like a running joke of, you go to the doctor with a sore toe and the first thing he'd say is, do you smoke? And it's, but that's kind of fair enough, maybe not for a sore toe, but, why are you even going to the doctor if there's like 100 things that you're doing well? You're overweight, you're smoking, you're drinking, you don't do any exercise, and like, you go to the doctor, I don't feel well, or, I've got high blood pressure or whatever. It's like, no shit, of course you have. You're in an abusive relationship with yourself. Why are you even doing it? And the point is, the whole concept of being responsible for yourself has been taken. It's almost, if you suggest to someone these days like that, you should take responsibility for your situation, it's as if you're just talking some crazy talk. It's like, well, I pay my taxes. It's like, well, that's another one. You pay your taxes. It's like, do you? Do you pay your taxes, or are they taken from you? Because as far as I can tell, I don't actually pay my taxes. They're like, they're removed from my bank account, whether I like it or not. And I can't say, hold on, I'm not quite sure that I like you using my money to kill people, or I'm not quite sure that I like you using this money to enforce like X, Y, Z, or there's absolutely no way that they're accountable for what what they're spending on. So in what sense, there's absolutely no consent there. There's just, you're not, even if you're happy to have stuff, you know, like, oh, I'm proud to pay my taxes. It's like, well, always on everything. You know, I don't know. It just seems like kind of, it's like a real fantasy that people sort of have to live in just to be able to, you know, go and live a normal life, and you know, go through all the processes that are supposed to be necessary to, you know, keep things running, like democracy, which is, you know, it's kind of, you know, there's lots of ways of like explaining why it's not really that moral. But I mean, if you think about it, if you've got 5 people and you have a vote on something, like a 3-person voting the same way, that's the majority. Like the way we set up this democracy thing, it's like those 3 people, their rights completely negate the rights of the other 2. It's like, well, you know, how does that work? You know, I mean, really, if, like I said, if you just go to that quiet place and really think about it, it's like, well, you know, well, because I'm talking about principles, surely when something's correct, then it's always correct, like it's always right. So, you know, I live in Spain, and there's, you know, recently been, well, not recently, but a few years ago, you can tell I'm getting old now. If anything happens in the last 15 years, I think it's like recent. You know, there's, you know, there was a horrible thing where a young girl was gang raped, you know, by like 10 guys or something. And it's, you know, absolutely terrible. But, you know, it was like 9 of them, they all wanted to do one thing and she didn't, and you know, that's kind of democracy, you know, or is it? You know, it's like, how does it really work? I mean, what are the implications of, you know, voting for things and, you know, saying, well, we all want this and, you know, so you can't have it? I mean, what happens if it does absolutely go against your principles? You know, do you not have some kind of moral right to like just say, no way, absolutely no way? I mean, shouldn't the fact that there's a term, conscientious objector, surely all objectors are like, you know, it's surely everything's a matter of conscience. You know, I don't understand now how we've got to a point where, you know, there seems to be sort of like, well, there's preferences and, you know, yeah, well, I don't really mind, and, you know, but when you're voting for stuff, surely the thing that you don't want, you know, out of a matter of conscience, you really don't want it. So, why is that fair? And in case you hadn't picked up on this, I don't vote. But that's because I don't think I have the right to force my will on someone else. It's not that I don't think, I mean, I absolutely don't have the right. You know, how could I have the right? It doesn't mean it couldn't happen. It doesn't mean that I couldn't just, you know, physically force my will on someone else. You know, it could happen. You know, the laws of the universe, you know, physics allows it, but it doesn't mean it's right. It's, you know, it's, you know, when we talk about natural law and stuff like that, that's what they're talking about, not like the law of the jungle. And no, natural law is just, you know, you've got the right to do anything that you want as long as it doesn't affect someone else. You know, and that's like the non-aggression principle, which is, it seems like a great way, at least as a template for, you know, how people should interact. And the whole, you know, the whole having a state, and I mean, let's face it, what's the state? It's just a proxy for violence. It's just, you know, if anyone who votes actually really thinks that they've got, you know, any power to like affect how the state does things. I mean, the state does what it wants, and also it generally tends to do what it wants, irrespective of like which party's in power anyway. You know, the state always wins, and it just does what it wants. So, anyway. So, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, I'm going to be sort of having these talks and rants and stuff about, you know, things that I think are important. I mean, they're certainly important to me. Like, I do think that, I mean, who was it? I know Michael Jackson did the song The Man in the Mirror, but that's almost certainly not where it's from. Was it Gandhi? You know, said that if you want to see a change in the world, you should start with yourself. And I think that that's completely correct. But also, it's the only change that you've got any like authority to make. You can't. I think everything should be like a lead by example type thing. And that's what I try to do with my kids. I mean, you know, obviously I'm fallible like everyone else is, and you know, I wish I could say, you know, I never scream at my kids, but I obviously do. You know, let's face it. But I also try and apologise when I'm not right. And one of the things that I have told them since they're very young, is just because I tell you to do something doesn't mean I'm right. It does mean that I think I'm doing the best for you, but you know, that might not be the case. I think it is, I hope it is. And then if it's not, you know, we revisit situations and say, you know what, I shouldn't have done that, or you know what, we did that wrong, or you know, I've done this more than once. But also the fact that my kids expect it now, so that's also another level of accountability. You know, I can't expect. I mean, it hasn't really happened, but you know, I encourage my kids to say, "Do you remember when you said that? That wasn't right, was it? You know, or you know, you shouldn't have done that." Or you know, I think that's that. You know, if you can have that level of accountability to the like your immediate family, you know, probably your friends, it sets up a better, you know, just a better way to be. You know, but to be able to do that, you need to want to do that, and to want to do that, you need some kind of personal philosophy of, you know, what do I believe in. And just before, like, I'll be wrapping this up now, I just don't want to go on too long. Like, one of the things that I really believe in is, like, you should treat yourself as you'd have other people treat you. Because, you know, I think a lot of the problems that we have in society are because people, like, are beating themselves up about stuff. And, you know, like, we overeat, or we drink too much, or, you know, we take drugs, and it's kind of, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not, like, anti-alcohol, or, you know, if people want to take drugs, then fine, you know, I've got no problem with people adults doing what, you know, whatever they want. If it doesn't bother anyone else, not if it doesn't bother anyone else, but if it doesn't hurt anyone else, like physically hurt anyone else, then I'm fine, you know, go and do whatever you want in the privacy of your own home or whatever. But there's so much, like self, you know, sadism. You know, I think that's where, I mean, I've done it myself, where like you end up overeating or binging or something, and at the back of your mind, you know, you just like kind of, it's a flagellation, you're sort of punishing yourself in some kind of weird way. You know, and one of the things that I've like had to deal with is just, you know, what's going on in my head. You know, why am I happy? Why am I not happy when I'm feeling down and stuff? You know, what's that for? And you know, until you actually own it and be responsible for it, then you're not going to get anywhere. You can't be going around and pointing and saying, oh, you know, the world would be better if, you know, if that guy who had, you know, X amount, you know, whatever, however, you know, 9 zeros wealth, you know, if he spread it out amongst everyone else, then we'd all be happy. And you know what? We just wouldn't. It's just not about money at all. And it's not about forcing other people. I don't think we'll ever be happy while we're forcing people to do things. It's only when we don't feel the need to force anyone to do things that I think everyone will cooperate. Or not even cooperate, we'll just go in the, as long as we're not aggressing against each other, then we don't even need to cooperate. We just need to not aggress against each other. So anyway, that was a very rambly thing. I'm mostly expecting to be doing this while I'm cooking, because that's the time that I have every day. that I need to eat, and so I need to cook. And so I think I'd like to just like talk a little bit about, you know, things about food, you know, things about, you know, keeping your weight in check and stuff. I mean, it wasn't that long where I was like, you know, pretty fat, you know, and it was just something that when you have kids and stuff, and you have to think about, you know, who's going to look after these kids if I'm like fat and dying, and you know, it's like, hold on, get a grip. And so we did, and so, you know, I think we can, you know, certain people might benefit from just hearing a little bit about how I got my shit together and stuff. And so that's it. We'll talk soon.